you, Francisco. That was wonderful. It is now a great honor to introduce our last student speaker. I actually am very touched by this. If you are familiar with JVC, I got the opportunity to serve as Angela's program coordinator when she was a volunteer. So our next speaker is Angela Owczarek, a current Jesuit volunteer, speaking on the other side of the bridges as taught to me by the I-10 and the I-66.
Good afternoon. My name is Angela, and last year I spent much of my first year as a Jesuit volunteer under the Interstate 10 Bridge in New Orleans, Louisiana, or the I-10 Bridge, specifically where it cuts through the Treme neighborhood. I was working at the time with the Harry Thompson Center, which serves people experiencing homelessness in New Orleans. I spent a lot of my time under the I-10 Bridge last year as it stood between my bus stop and my work, and I often stopped to chat with clients there who had the contents of their whole lives spread around us: tents, lawn chairs, pieces of cardboard, tools for self-protection, photographs, books, clothes, signs of relationship and romance, Bibles, everything in between. Their lives under the bridge were often realities filled with violence, instability, hunger, and mental illness. And under the bridge is the most common answer I recorded as a place of residence last year when doing client assessments and intakes. Thus, it is impossible for me to consider the experiences I've had thus far as a Jesuit volunteer for 12 months in New Orleans and 3 months so far here in DC without thinking about bridges. Two in particular, the I-10 in New Orleans, and a bridge I've more recently become acquainted with, the I-66 here in DC. It is also impossible for me then to consider bridges, the theme of this year's teach-in, without thinking about the negatives of bridges, as they are known by my clients, people who experience homelessness. First, I can see bridges as disruptors of life. Many of my clients who lived under the I-10 in New Orleans last year once were housed and lived just blocks from the I-10 before it divided the Treme neighborhood, once famous for housing many African Americans, jazz musicians, and was a really thriving enclave before the bridge was built. Willie, a particularly talkative client who often bragged to me about his potato salad recipe, loved to point to nearby street corners, visible in slices through the beams of bridge from his section of sidewalk, and talk about the oak trees that used to line the street or the tiny restaurant that his family had once owned before many businesses in the Treme neighborhood closed upon the I-10's construction. The I-10 bridge had disrupted Willie's place in the Treme, changing it from a place rooted in family and tradition to one made up of relative anonymity lived out on the cement. Second, I can see bridges as things that hide the truth of poverty from people who sail by in cars above. As a Jesuit volunteer with a limited budget and no driver's license last year, I rarely found myself on the top side where cars go on the I-10, but it does offer a stunning view of downtown New Orleans. One time I did find myself up there was toward the end of the year in July, when I was finally working on, after 23 years of life, obtaining my driver's license, so there's still hope for all of you if you don't have it yet. As my driving instructor, Cynthia, and I sailed up from street level onto our I-10 entrance, we passed a group of my clients, and Cynthia, my driving instructor, commented on their laziness, dishonesty, annoying persistence, not knowing that I knew them. Somehow, this bridge allowed Cynthia to feel separate from or in competition with my clients, even though both parties, my clients and Cynthia, shared with me similar stories of racism and economic oppression in the same city as we got to know each other. Finally, I see bridges as large, permanent structures that do nothing to bring people closer together and only keep things just where they are. A driver can exit off of the I-10 directly to the New Orleans Superdome, and it is that's where the Saints play, for those of you who don't know. And it is a more than yearly occurrence for portions underneath the I-10 to be cleared out of all homeless encampments in anticipation of the large influx of visitors who come to New Orleans for Saint season and don't want to see homeless encampments under the bridge. In my mind, the I-10 was allowing people to come into New Orleans, but doing nothing to facilitate a sharing of resources beyond what seemed convenient. But the play on words aside, do these features of physical bridges, as I have encountered them, these negatives, do they mean anything to me as I consider my own approach to bridge building in a justice sense? Does my uniquely complicated relationship with bridges have anything to teach me about the kind of bridges this teach-in is talking about? And I quote from yesterday's opening remarks, bridges between rich and poor that establish advocacy links of mutual support. This question about the negatives of physical bridges and the possibilities of social justice bridges is particularly important to me in my second year of JVC here in DC. I now work in the Center for Social Justice at Georgetown University, coordinating homelessness outreach efforts. I focus on connecting students with one nearby drop-in center in particular, the Georgetown Ministry Center, which provides basic services to its guests and also conducts street outreach with its more service-resistant clients, who often I find living under parts of the I-66, just a few minutes from here. As this year began, before I knew the theme of this year's teach-in, I often found myself explaining my job to people saying, I am trying to build bridges between Georgetown students and people experiencing homelessness. Sounds so good. But as I traveled between Georgetown's campus and the places where Georgetown Ministry Center reaches its clients, like under the I-66, I asked myself, what kind of bridge building can actually benefit both Georgetown students and those living under this bridge? I wrestle regularly with the answer to that question and with questions about what it means to transport students in and out of the lives and spaces of those who are experiencing homelessness. So in a room full of people who care about justice, about having a whole teach-in weekend for justice, I would like to ask you some of those questions, so let me know your thoughts later. My first question, what would it look like if my clients, people experiencing homelessness, were at Georgetown sporting events, could use the Georgetown Library, or were in class alongside our students? What would things like this do to not only increase travel between the lives lived at Georgetown and the lives lived under the I-66, but to actually change the ways in which life is lived in both places? In other words, what do I teach Georgetown students when Georgetown students and I build bridges whose traffic only flows in one direction, from our circles into less privileged ones, but not back again? My second question, what do I assume about Georgetown students when I think a so-called bridge is needed for them to interact with people who experience homelessness? Do I set in stone the stereotype that people who have experienced homelessness don't end up on Jesuit campuses? Whose experiences do I erase when I say that? A final question for now, though just one more of the hundreds in my head, deals with the idea of what services or goods I might assume I should bring with me when traveling over bridges of social justice. At the start of this semester, I advertised working at the drop-in center to students saying, anyone with a strong listening ear is encouraged to apply. And it's true that Georgetown students need to listen in this work and that they'll often do a great job. It's also been true to me under the I-10 and the I-66 that people experiencing homelessness can often listen to each other much better than I can. These experiences make me think, what do I bring over bridges based on my assumptions about what those who live on the other side might need in my own mind? I look forward to all of your insight about these questions, and I'm grateful for the platform of this teach-in and my participation in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps that I have the time, space, and privilege to ask these questions, and particularly thankful to my clients to be able to work alongside them, and I hope one day all of you get the privilege of hearing their voices, which matter most in this conversation. Without bridges, I don't know what my JVC experience would look like. If not for under the I-10 and the I-66, I don't know where I would have spent the past 15 months. But without a continued critical lens set on the kind of bridges that I build in the work of social justice, I am not sure how quickly the lives under the I-10 and the I-66 will ever change, nor if mine will in response. Thank you.